Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has called on the next Prime Minister to hold a second referendum before taking Britain out of the EU and says Labour will campaign to remain. After weeks of intense debate within his party, Mr Corbyn said the next Prime Minister should ask the people what they think of any Brexit deal negotiated with Brussels or whether they approve of leaving the EU without a deal if one can't be negotiated. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar.
He looked relaxed, but smile or no smile, Jeremy Corbyn's bowed to pressure inside his party. Labour's new pledge to fight the next Prime Minister's Brexit, deal or no deal, to demand a new referendum and campaign to stay in. Is Labour now a party of remain or leave?
Labour is a party which says we will take no deal off the table and the people will have a choice in the future as to whether they remain in the European Union or they accept what would be very, very damaging no deal exit from the EU with the consequences for food prices, for medicine supplies and industrial investment.
What about at the next election if there's no Brexit by then?
We're a big democratic organisation. I've just spent some time consulting with all the parts of the Labour Party and the Labour movement, and we've come to this position. We have a democratic process. We'll decide our election position when the election comes.
Have you not backed away under pressure from the mass membership and from your colleagues for fear of losing much more support?
Not a bit of it. I've been listening.
But the pressure to support another referendum had grown too loud to ignore. Next, Labour's anti-Brexiteers will demand the party backs Remain before the election and if it wins. Today, they're celebrating.
Our members have been telling us for some time now that they want us to be a Remain party, that they want us to put the New Deal to the people. We're now going to campaign for that, and I'm very proud that the Shadow Cabinet have listened to their concerns. There's further discussions to be had about what we do during an election and after.
Others say Labour must back a Brexit deal.
All of those advocates of a second referendum in my party, they say what they want, but they don't really explain how to get there. And the idea that Boris Johnson is going to become Prime Minister and then say, let's put it all to a referendum, it's just not going to happen.
A climate emergency.
Would Labour lose more Leave supporters now? And what about Remainers who've turned away? Is it already too late to bring back the droves of Labour supporters and potential Labour supporters who've deserted Labour because of your position so far on Brexit?
Labour will offer something very different, a radical change in our country where we value everybody, not the tax giveaways that Johnson and Hunt are competing with each other to give to the richest in our society.
Labour's Brexit plan, like the government's, is still a work in progress. More pro-Remain today, but Labour could still go into the next election promising to get a better deal in Europe and then call a referendum on that. And if it does, will it be pro-Remain or pro-Leave? Jeremy Corbyn's put off deciding election policy until later, kicked that can down the road. Both the major parties are feeling the squeeze of Brexit. Neither one really knows how to handle it. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, Labour have finally set out their definitive position on Brexit, sort of. They're now publicly endorsing a second referendum and say that if it's a choice between the current Conservative deal, no deal or no Brexit at all, they'd back Remain. But Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't say what his party's position would be if they won a general election. All clear then. Well, here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon, again, to shed some light on it all. So, Gary, is Labour now a definitively pro-Remain party?
It's not as simple as that. That is what many people in the grassroots of the party wanted it to be as of this moment. But it has taken, I think, what you have to accept is a pretty big step in that direction. Such a step that Jeremy Corbyn felt he could email party members who he knows are breathing down his neck on this and would like the party to become more pro-Remain. Most of them, that is, a sizable chunk. But as you say, what has actually happened is that Labour has decided that whoever the next Tory Prime Minister is, if they cook up a deal, it should go to a referendum and Labour would support Remain. If they don't cook up a deal and we come out or threaten to come out with no deal, that should go to a referendum and Labour would support Remain. As you said, the giant question mark still, what would Labour's policy be in the general election, which it says it wants very soon? So Labour figures say, well, we can't have a policy this yet because we haven't been through all the processes that Labour has in its democratic infrastructure. You can't just whistle that up, but that is enormously frustrating still to some people, and they wonder if it looks like Labour is being dragged so slowly towards this position that they want them to end up in, what credibility will it have if one day it does eventually proclaim itself as a 100% Remain party? Here, anyway, is how Jeremy Corbyn put it in an interview today.
Labour is a party which says we will take no deal off the table and the people will have a choice in the future as to whether they remain in the European Union or they accept what would be very, very damaging no deal exit from the EU with the consequences for food prices, for medicine supplies and industrial investment. I've just spent some time consulting with all the parts of the Labour Party and the Labour movement, and we've come to this position. We have a democratic process. We'll decide our election position when the election comes.
Question over the issue of its Brexit position not entirely resolved, and certainly the row over anti-Semitism in the party is far from sorted either, is it?
It feels like it's hotting up again this week. We had 3 resignations from the party whip of Labour peers today. 3 peers decided that they could no longer stay there. Lord Turnberg, Lord Treesman, a former party general secretary he is, and Lord Darcy, a former health minister in Gordon Brown's administration. They all said that they couldn't tolerate how Labour was dealing with anti-Semitism. Lord Treesman wrote a particularly tart letter about that. Another former General Secretary of the party, though, is one of the people who looks like they've been giving testimony to the Panorama investigation, which is coming out tomorrow night. And that is looking into what Labour did over anti-Semitism. One shadow cabinet source said to me a moment ago, the leader's office has its crash helmet on, waiting for that.
Gary, thank you very much. Well, we're joined now from North London by Lord Turnberg, one of the 3 Labour peers who resigned the whip today. Lord Turnberg, why now?
Well, we've been waiting a long time. This hasn't just happened overnight. I've been waiting, hoping that the Labour Party would come to its senses, that we would have some reasonable outcomes. But it's clear that as time has gone on, things just seem to get worse. Every day we have a new announcement of something terrible in the party. So we had to do it sometime. We wanted to do it before the Panorama programme tomorrow night. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't simply a response to that programme. It's been something that's been developing for some time.
I mean, Lord Treesman, in his letter today, has said the Labour Party is no longer a safe environment for Jewish people. It is plainly institutionally anti-Semitic. Now, he directly lays the blame at the door of Mr Corbyn, saying he and his circle are anti-Semitic. Are you saying the same?
I think the leader of the party and the party machine behind him do have a problem with anti-Semitism. They do not seem to be able to eradicate it properly. They talk about getting rid of racism, but they don't talk about anti-Semitism particularly. And when events occur, as they do, they seem to be very slow in dealing with them.
And yet the Labour Party has consistently said, sorry to cut across you, but the party has consistently said it has been taking decisive action against anti-Semitism, and it completely rejects what it calls these false and offensive claims.
It would say that, wouldn't it? I think the problem is that it doesn't appear to Jewish people and to a lot of people in the House of Lords. Incidentally, it's very sad for me to be leaving the community in the House of Lords, which by and large are very helpful and supportive. It's the party leadership where the problems lie, and they may say that they don't accept any accusations of anti-Semitism, but they do seem to do so little to try and combat it.
They do say that, and they say it absolutely. They say they're taking decisive action, doubling the number of staff dedicated to dealing with complaints and cases, and that it says that our records show anti-Semitism cases which have gone through disciplinary procedures amount for 0.06% of the party's membership.
That's part of the problem. I think the numbers of those who make anti-Semitic remarks on the internet in various forms may not be very large, but they're certainly numerous enough to be noticed. And not only that, when they occur, very few of them seem to come to any sort of resolution.
But I just wonder whether you think this is about a leadership that is either disconnected from the facts as you and the other lords see it, or in denial.
I think they're in denial. I think the fact that we now have an official inquiry into anti-Semitism within the Labour Party speaks volumes.
Lord Turnberg, thank you very much for talking to us this evening. Thank you.
Let's move on. For students of Labour's attitude to Brexit, described by many as deliberately ambiguous, there was a discernible shift today. Yes, there was. As a result of this morning's shadow cabinet meeting, the party is a little bit more pro-Remain today than it was yesterday and backs a second referendum. As for what happens if Labour won a general election, well, that still isn't clear.
Labour's carefully constructed attempt to satisfy both Leave and Remain voters has ended up not pleasing anyone. Its Brexit policy has bombed at the ballot box. The results have forced a response from the party's leader.
Labour is a party which says we will take no deal off the table and the people will have a choice in the future as to whether they remain in the European Union or they accept what would be very, very damaging no deal exit from the EU.
Pretty dismal results in the recent European elections proved that voters didn't think that Labour's position on Brexit was clear enough. Here at party headquarters, they knew they had to make changes, and today's move is an attempt to make Labour's policy on Brexit a lot clearer.
Our members have been telling us for some time now that they want us to be a Remain party, that they want us to put the New Deal to the people. We're now going to campaign for that, and I'm very proud that the Shadow Cabinet have listened to their concerns.
But today's shift leaves Labour MPs like Emma Lewell-Buck in a quandary, loyal to the leadership, but also to the majority in her North East constituency who voted Leave in 2016.
I've got a heavy heart with the announcement that was made today. I would much rather that the party stayed committed to our 2017 manifesto, which said we would work towards a deal to leave, and that is what I will be continuing to do.
And if the party takes a more pro-Remain stance, do you think there's a risk of some damage?
Well, I think that's been part of the argument all along, that we're predicted to lose potentially 40 seats if we become a party of Remain.
But Labour hasn't yet clarified what its Brexit policy would be in the event of a general election.
There is nothing in Jeremy Corbyn's statement that takes them decisively away from their sitting on the fence, their constructive ambiguity.
What has become clear today is that Jeremy Corbyn's latest move doesn't fully heal Labour's Brexit divisions. Angus Walker, News at 10, Westminster.
3 Labour peers resigned the whip today, telling Newsnight exclusively they could no longer tolerate the party's failure to get to grips with anti-Semitism. Lord Treesman, Labour's former General Secretary, was the first to break his silence, pointing the finger directly at Jeremy Corbyn and his circle for having never once made the right judgment call about an issue reflecting deep prejudice. Newsnight broke the news that Lords Darzai and Turnberg were offering their own resignation shortly after. Labour has said it completely rejects what it calls false and offensive claims. It was not the headline Labour was, however, looking for today. This morning, the party hoped to re-energise their Brexit position by a pivot of sorts towards Remain, acknowledging they'd call for a second referendum in the event of a Tory Brexit or a no deal. They would still seek to negotiate their own Labour version of Brexit. What to make of the timing of all that we have seen today? Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
A leader under siege, with enemies on the march and allies in despair. Is Jeremy Corbyn now in retreat? Today, a step gingerly in a Remain direction.
Tories want no deal. We will stop that, and we believe the public should have a vote to decide whether it should be no deal or remain in the EU.
Now perhaps some unity on Europe, but deep divisions elsewhere.
We support Chris Williamson.
Support for an old Corbyn ally fighting expulsion, over claims that he downplayed alleged anti-Semitism in Labour. Due process is underway, says the party. Not enough for three party grandees who today resigned the whip, as reported exclusively by Newsnight. The former Labour General Secretary Lord Treesman accused Jeremy Corbyn and his circle of being anti-Semitic. And he added that the party is no longer a safe environment for Jewish people.
I've known Jeremy Corbyn since the 1980s when he first became an MP, and I spent years and years and years defending him as an anti-racist. It was only recently, in the last year or so, when I started to judge him on his actions, that I realised that his anti-racism didn't extend to Jews, and that somehow that was the only acceptable form of racism which he allowed to exist within the Labour Party. It's terribly damaging to Labour.
With Parliament limping towards its summer holidays, it feels like a defining moment for the Corbyn project is approaching. A move today by critics of the leadership's handling of the anti-Semitism allegations, and on Brexit, a midsummer manoeuvre by the leadership designed to provide clarity. In opposition, Labour will now be an unequivocal party of Remain. In government, another story. Labour could support Brexit with a deal that would be shaped by the party in office.
Labour is a party which says we will take no deal off the table and the people will have a choice in the future as to whether they remain in the European Union or they accept what would be very, very damaging no deal exit from the EU, with the consequences for food prices, for medicine supplies and industrial investment.
Have you not backed away under pressure from the mass membership and from your colleagues for fear of losing much more support?
Not a bit of it. I've been listening.
We must bring the public back into this decision.
Warm words from Labour's pro-European deputy, who's been pressing for change.
Our members have been telling us for some time now that they want us to be a Remain party, that they want us to put the New Deal to the people. We're now going to campaign for that, and I'm very proud that the Shadow Cabinet have listened to their concerns.
One pro-EU Corbyn ally was hardly rejoicing. Diana, but do we have a happy Shadow Home Secretary? Jeremy Corbyn beginning to move in the right direction? Diplomat. The leader of a troubled party finally moves to keep most of his warring tribe together, but splits are never far away.
Nick, what then? Well, earlier I spoke to the former Labour General Secretary, Lord Treesman. I began by asking him why he'd taken the decision to quit the Labour whip today.
I've come to what I think is a very sad decision for me, because I've been in the Labour Party a long time, served it as its General Secretary, that it is institutionally anti-Semitic, that its leadership is incapable of dealing with issues of anti-Semitism and has no intention of doing so. For me, it is an ethical barrier that I could not climb over and accept.
But you've reached a tipping point today. What was that point?
Well, it's been building for a long time, and incident after incident is like a kind of mad psychodrama. You pick up the morning's papers and there's another issue. And quite aside from the issues which are in the public domain, the stream of invective that you get through social media is absolutely unbelievable. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And so I think that we got to a point now where it's just not sustainable to continue. You have to take a decision about what your own ethics are.
In your letter, this is directed straight at the leader, at Jeremy Corbyn himself. You say, its leader and his circle are anti-Semitic, never having once made the right judgment call. Where is the evidence that Jeremy Corbyn himself is anti-Semitic?
If you look at event after event after event, and there's now a huge list of events, and you ask yourself the question in relation to any one of them, my challenge is any one of them, has he made the right call on it? And the answer is not once, never. And in those circumstances, it's hard not to come to the conclusion that he either is indifferent to the problem or he's part of the problem.
But that's not fair, is it? I mean, he is cooperating with the EHRC investigation. He has now adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. He has defined his own political life as a fight against racism in all its forms. He's increased the disciplinary body. I mean, couldn't he turn round and say, what more do you actually want me to do?
I'd like to have seen some of the people who have been visibly and openly anti-Semitic dealt with on a reasonable timescale and in a way which would be appropriate. And I know it can be done. I was General Secretary of the organisation. I know it can be done. But it's never been done.
But there have been expulsions from the party. We've seen, 12 expulsions and a huge list, more than 600 cases still pending. Isn't the truth that the leadership is just trying to work through this?
I don't think there's any evidence that they're working through it in a proper way. I think the number of expulsions rather than suspensions is tiny, and I think you probably find that some of those people left of their own volition before they actually got expelled. We've obviously got a very big problem, a very large number of people against whom these allegations have been made. Whether it takes a long time or not, the number itself is astonishing. The fact that it's taking so long just adds to my incredulity.
Lord Treisman, you're a former Labour General Secretary under Blair. You've also referenced the Brexit position in your letter. There will be some who say perhaps this is a slightly convenient way out from taking the party whip when you don't like the political direction they're going in anyway.
I've been involved in the Labour Party for over 50 years, and I've been involved, as everybody is in political life, with every kind of argument under the sun. It's never occurred to me to walk away. It's never occurred to me not to stay and put the arguments. I've always done that. It's a distinctively different moment now. I may dislike the policies. I may think they're incredibly bad for the United Kingdom, but the reality is that there is a distinct ethical issue which has now come up, which is quite different from all the ones I faced whenever I had arguments about anything in the past. None of those arguments would have induced me to walk away from the party, not one of them.
How long has this decision been brewing for you?
I think it's been brewing for between 12 and 18 months.
Some would say that's a long time to have sat there and not moved.
Well, you know, like a lot of people who've been in an organisation for a long time and feel very loyal to it for all sorts of reasons, there's always a hope that something will come across the horizon that will make it better, that one of the reforms that have been suggested will have a real impact. But I've given up believing that. I think it's a unicorn theory. I think people are hoping for it, but it will not mature.
Was there one final trigger, one snap for you?
The thing that made me conclude that there was really no way through this was the decision of the party to get libel lawyers, and pretty aggressive libel lawyers, the Rottweilers of the libel law world, to threaten people who were going to speak about the anti-Semitism that they had found whilst working in the party.
You've heard about the allegations of bullying in the inner circles. Is that something that you have experienced or that you recognise?
Well, I see it, and not in the House of Lords, but I see it directed to people in the House of Commons. They quite frequently, if they don't take what is regarded as being a pure enough line, they're threatened with deselection. I anticipate there will be attempts at deselection. There have already been one or two, but I think there'll probably be more.
Lord Treisman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lord Treisman explaining why he resigned the Labour whip. We did ask the Labour Party for an interview on this, but they declined. A Labour Party spokesman told us, "We completely reject these false and offensive claims. The Labour Party at all levels is implacably opposed to anti-Semitism and is determined to root out this social cancer from our movement and society. Our records show that anti-Semitism cases that have gone through the stage of our disciplinary procedures since September 2015 account for about 0.06% of the party's membership. This represents a tiny minority, but one anti-Semite is one too many. Will continue to act against this repugnant form of racism."